The world is full of selfish people. Being homeless is something no one wants for themselves. They often go through a lot of hard times and financial struggles in life. The word homeless usually captures a negative connotation, but it's not always like that, as those on the streets starve of human contact. It must be amazing to witness people around the world doing good when so many neglect to do so. In the end, we're all human beings deserving of respect. Randy Emmons was walking to her apartment one day when she heard this man voicing his frustrations outside. Instead of averting her eyes and walking past him like so many others do, she decided to stop and listen. The man was called Pedro Reed. He was saying out loud, "Imagine no one ever stopping and saying hello. Everyone just stares, but no one knows how educated I am, how intelligent I am. All they see is a man who doesn't have a home and doesn't have anyone to call." Randy brought her boyfriend, John Suazo, down to the street. They both asked Pedro about his life and how he got into the situation. They discovered he moved from South Carolina to Los Angeles in 1999. He had struggled with drugs and alcohol, which left him homeless. Pedro hadn't seen his family in more than 20 years. To complicate matters more, he went by the alias Franklin Mitchell and didn't have an ID, which made it nearly impossible for his loved ones to track him down. Randy was touched by Pedro's story. Randy runs a homeless charity and gave Pedro a backpack filled with food, water, and other essentials. However, she still wanted to do more. She made a Facebook post regarding Pedro's story and asked for donations so they could set Pedro up in a hotel and reunite him with his family. 3 days later, they raised $6,500. Then, armed with names and his grandmother's address, the couple scoured the internet for clues. After finding and calling multiple wrong numbers, they hit the jackpot when Pedro's uncle Pierre Grant called them back. Pierre had been praying for over 20 years that his family would find him, and the day finally came. Thanks to all the donations they received, Randy and John were able to fly Pierre and Pedro's cousin Mia Green out for an emotional reunion. Pedro moved in with his aunt and uncle and finally got his chance to start over. Of course, he'll never forget the couple who turned his life around with a little kindness. Their names will be forever etched on his heart. Randy hopes their story will encourage more people to stop and listen when they see someone living on the streets.
Also, if you've not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these animal stories every day. Now, back to the story.
Mick Myers. Most people give money to homeless beggars because they assume the person will use it to buy food. However, some homeless people spend their earnings on alcohol or drugs, which may make sense given the circumstances they're in. This is one of the reasons why people sometimes don't notice when someone's crying for help. There are tons of people who depend on generosity and goodwill. It can be really hard to tell which person needs help more. Mick Myers was born in 1950. He had a difficult childhood and eventually found himself living on the streets for the majority of his adult life. He was completely disregarded by the people he once called his family, friends, and even by society as a whole. Mick knew that he was adopted by a family from San Leandro, California, when he was 2 years old, but he didn't even know if Mick Myers was even his real name. As a child, Mick earned decent grades and participated in his high school marching band. Unfortunately, things turned bad as he grew up. As a teenager, he had trouble getting along with the siblings who felt they treated him as an outsider. After the passing of his adoptive parents, his siblings and another extended family turned their backs on Mick and disowned him. Unfortunately, this is all too common for adopted children. It didn't take long for Mick to find himself without a job or a support system. He felt that any of his purpose in life had been ripped out from under him. Thankfully, Mike found a job that he enjoyed as a truck driver. He enjoyed the job so much because it allowed him to travel and gave his life some much-needed structure. Even though he was constantly moving around, he still had a driving schedule that he followed every day and became close with his coworkers. Mick thoroughly enjoyed his time as a truck driver, but unfortunately, he was involved in a serious car accident. The crash resulted in Mick breaking his back and left him in the hospital for weeks. After Mick left the hospital, he was confined to a wheelchair for the next year and was only rehabilitated enough to walk around on crutches. He would regularly panhandle and play his guitar on the side of the street. He barely made ends meet. In November 2017, Mick ran into Deputy Sheriff Jacob Sowell beside a freeway in California. However, this was not the first time meeting each other. The junction was one of the homeless man's hangout areas where he would panhandle and play guitar. A busy area where Sowell had repeatedly asked him not to beg. The officer had only ever given the man warnings and had never had a real conversation with the man. All he knew was that he was a homeless man who frequently begged on the same street. At one point, Jacob had intended to give the man a citation for continuing to panhandle on the corner he was warned not to. Mick ended up telling the deputy all about his family, disability, and life on the street. Without a NID, the man wasn't eligible for Social Security, something that made his life on the streets even more difficult. He had remained undocumented for the majority of his life. Mick's back condition made a lot of jobs almost impossible, even if they wouldn't have been that hard for someone healthy. Most jobs that he applied for required him to be on his feet for hours, which would have caused him great. He moved around between manufacturing and food service positions and even worked at the DMV for some time. The officer couldn't help but feel sorry for Mick, so he gave him his word that he would help him get an ID in order to get Social Security and get off the streets. Why did Swalwell decide to personally help Mick over anyone else? As it turns out, Swalwell claims he felt that Mars was being truthful and sincere. Something else that made Swalwell believe Mick's story was that he had never spent the money he made on drugs or alcohol. He would barely make enough money to get a meal at a nearby fast food restaurant. Swalwell wasted no time in getting Mick the proper help that he needed. His first stop was the DMV to see if he could retrace records and learn at what point they had been lost. Unfortunately, even though he was a former DMV employee, it looked as though his records had been erased. Mick would need to acquire a birth certificate as well as proof that he was a resident of California. Swalwell knew how difficult this process would be. Swalwell's next step was to enlist the help of his church pastor and other members of the Alameda Sheriff's Department. They helped to provide Mick with a proof of residency by signing off on the necessary documents. Simultaneously, Swalwell started to work on Myers' birth certificate, following a paper trail back to the hospital where he was born. In the end, the deputy matched to get his hands on the birth certificate and turned in all of the necessary paperwork to the DMV. After jumping through countless bureaucratic hoops, Myers was able to get an ID in December 2017. After going through all of Mick's documents, it was discovered that Mick wasn't his birth name, but it was a shortened version of his middle name. Myers' real name at birth was Gordon Michael Oakley, something Myers was completely unaware of. Mark Eskins, an experienced private investigator, heard about Myers' story and immediately became interested. For some time, he had volunteered for the charity Miracle Messages, which helped reunite homeless individuals with the long-lost family and friends. Mark reached out to Swalwell and offered his services to help find Myers' biological family, well aware of the difficulties that would stand in his way using the information that was provided by Swalwell. Mark got to work. He began looking through the documents at the courthouse, hoping to find any surviving relatives. Eventually, Mark's persistence paid off. He found a case file at the courthouse about a young woman named Mary Pauline Oakley, who had married a man named Wiley Albert Oakley. The two had a small wedding with a child who became known as Mick Myers. The couple eventually had the wedding annulled and went separate ways, leaving their child up for adoption. It didn't take long for Mark to learn who biological father was, and that he had passed away years earlier. After learning the identity of Mick's biological mother, it was time to learn what had happened to her. After a few weeks of searching, Mark discovered a Mary Pauline Oakley living in Eureka, California. Mark decided to give the number a call. An elder woman answered the phone. Mrs. Oakley was alive and 85 years old. However, she was going by her middle name Pauline. Mark told Pauline about Mick and she was shocked. Mick was born with a hole in his stomach, a life-threatening condition. Although Pauline worked multiple jobs and did everything she could no longer keep up with the medical bills. After careful consideration, she had made the decision to give him up for adoption. She knew that this would provide him with the best opportunity of living a happy and successful life. He was put in the care of his future adoptive parents who attended the same church as her. In March 2018, Pauline and Mick spoke on the phone for the first time, but their communication didn't stop there. A few short weeks later, Mick flew to Eureka to meet his mother, with Mark and Swalwell providing emotional support. The mother and son both cried in each other's arms, both feeling fortunate that they had a chance to speak with the other again. Pauline was saddened to hear about all of the hardships her son experienced in his life. Mick recently moved in a new home with his mother, and he also allowed him to apply for health insurance and get Social Security, all thanks to Deputy Jacob Swalwell. Would you help a homeless person? Let us know in the comments below. We're always eager to find out what you think. I hope you like this video. Please share it and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.